Welcome. Somewhere beneath the dense tropical canopy of southern Mexico's Gulf Coast, beneath the slow brown rivers and the thick alluvial soil that has swallowed centuries whole, lies the foundation of an entire world, not one civilization among many. The foundation, the hidden grammar beneath every temple, every calendar, every sacred ball court that Mesoamerica would ever build. And almost no one knew it existed until a single stone face emerged from the jungle earth in 1938. A colossal human portrait carved from basalt, weighing dozens of tons, staring upward with an authority that had waited 3,000 years to be seen again. That face belongs to the Olmec, and their story is one of the most extraordinary, most consequential, and most quietly astonishing in all of human history. Here is what makes them remarkable. Around 1500 BCE, small farming communities began settling the fertile floodplains along the Coatzacoalcos and Tonalá river systems in what is now Veracruz and Tabasco. They cultivated maize, they fished abundant waterways, and then, with a speed and ambition that still puzzles archaeologists, they built Mesoamerica's first true city. They carved stone portraits of their rulers so massive that transporting a single one required moving 40 tons of basalt across 60 miles of jungle and river. Without wheels, without draft animals, through sheer human will and engineering genius. They developed a cosmology, a writing system, a sacred ball game, and a trade network that stretched across hundreds of miles. And when their great centers eventually fell silent, their cultural DNA flowed directly into the Maya, the Zapotec, and ultimately the Aztec, civilizations that shaped the Americas for millennia. This is the complete story of the Olmec. We will follow it from the very beginning, from the first river settlements and the emergence of social complexity, through the rise of San Lorenzo as the first great capital, through the colossal heads and the carved thrones of power, through the extraordinary ceremonial city of La Venta, with its earthen pyramid and buried jade offerings, through the sacred were-jaguar religion and the origins of the Mesoamerican ball game, through the long-distance trade routes that carried Olmec ideas across an entire cultural world, through the mysterious decline of their great centers, and finally through the enduring legacy that makes the Olmec not a forgotten civilization, but the invisible foundation beneath everything that followed. You will walk through a living ancient world, the humid air above the river floodplains, the weight of basalt under skilled hands, the gleam of jade in firelight, the silence of a ceremonial plaza at dawn, every detail drawn from decades of excavation, from the work of archaeologists who have spent lifetimes listening to what the earth remembers. The Olmec left no named dynasties in surviving texts, no written histories bearing their own voice. What they left is something deeper, a cultural architecture so fundamental that it shaped human civilization in the Americas for 3,000 years. Understanding them means understanding the hidden roots of an entire hemisphere's story. If you find meaning in these complete journeys through the ancient world, please subscribe so you never miss our next exploration. Each week we bring you the full story of a civilization, origins to legacy, beginning to end, nothing left out. The humid air is thick. The river moves slowly through the green. The stone faces wait in the earth. Let us begin our journey. The river arrives before anything else. It moves through the lowland forest in long, slow curves, carrying the memory of mountains in its silt, dark, mineral-rich sediment that settles across the floodplain each wet season like a quiet gift. This is the Gulf Coast of what will one day be called southern Mexico, where the states of Veracruz and Tabasco meet the warm waters of the Gulf in a landscape of extraordinary biological generosity. The year is somewhere near 1500 BCE, and the world here is green beyond description. The Coatzacoalcos River system drains a vast interior, spreading across lowland terrain where the forest canopy closes overhead and the air carries permanent moisture. Seasonal floods do not destroy this land. They renew it. Each year the rivers overflow their banks and retreat, leaving behind fresh layers of alluvial soil so fertile that maize planted here grows with a reliability that communities further inland cannot count on. Fish move through the waterways in abundance. Deer and tapir inhabit the forest margins. Turtles nest along the riverbanks. The land offers itself with unusual consistency. Into this landscape, small agricultural villages begin taking root. Radiocarbon evidence places the earliest settled occupation of the Olmec heartland at approximately 1500 BCE, concentrated along the river basins where flooding cycles could be read and anticipated. These communities build in wattle and daub, wooden frames packed with mud and plant fiber, sturdy enough for the climate, practical enough to rebuild when the rivers demand it. Villages cluster near water, but elevated enough to survive the seasonal surge. The geography itself teaches the logic of settlement. The ceramic tradition emerging from these early communities belongs to what archaeologists classify as the early formative period. Vessels are hand-built, fired at low temperatures, decorated with incised lines and simple geometric motifs. They hold water, store grain, serve food. They are functional objects, but they are also the first evidence of a shared visual language developing across the Gulf Coast lowland communities. A consistency of form and decoration that suggests contact, exchange, and the slow accumulation of shared identity. Maize is the foundation. Cultivated here alongside beans and squash in the combination that will sustain Mesoamerican civilization for millennia, it transforms these communities from mobile foragers into sedentary farmers with a stake in place. A community that plants maize must return to harvest it. A community that harvests must store, distribute, and account for what the land produces. From this necessity, social complexity begins its quiet emergence. Not everyone works the fields equally. Some individuals demonstrate skill in shaping clay, in reading the river's seasonal behavior, in organizing collective labor. Differential access to resources becomes visible in the archaeological record. Certain burials contain more, certain structures stand larger. The first faint outlines of hierarchy appear not through conquest, but through the gradual recognition that some knowledge, some skill, some authority carries weight that others acknowledge. Ritual activity leaves its earliest traces in small ceramic figurines. Human forms, some with exaggerated features, deposited in contexts suggesting deliberate placement rather than casual discard. The forest, the river, the rain, the soil, these are not neutral forces to the people living among them. They are presences requiring acknowledgement, relationship, reciprocity. The ceremonial impulse that will one day move mountains of basalt begins here, in small gestures made at the water's edge. By 1200 BCE, something is changing along the Coatzacoalcos. Villages are growing larger. Labor is being organized at scales that single families cannot explain. The river that gave these communities their foundation is about to give them something more. the conditions for a civilization that will quietly reshape the entire Mesoamerican world. The children of the river are becoming something new, and the land around them will never look the same again. The plateau rises from the surrounding lowland like a decision made in stone. It is not a natural formation, or rather, it is no longer purely natural. By 1200 BCE, the people of the Coatzacoalcos Basin have begun reshaping a long ridge of higher ground into something the landscape had never contained before, a deliberate platform, engineered and extended, commanding the river plain below with unmistakable authority. This is San Lorenzo. This is Mesoamerica's first city. The scale of the modification is difficult to absorb. The plateau stretches roughly 1.25 kilometers in length, its flanks cut by a series of long artificial ridges extending outward like fingers, or like the outstretched limbs of a figure laid upon the earth. Millions of cubic meters of fill have been moved, compacted, and shaped by human hands over generations. There are no draft animals here, no wheeled carts, no iron tools. There is only organized human labor, directed by an authority capable of sustaining effort across decades. The existence of San Lorenzo is itself evidence of a social transformation as profound as any monument it contains. Within this engineered landscape, a ruling class has emerged. Elite residences occupy the plateau's highest ground. Workshops cluster nearby, producing objects of extraordinary refinement. Ceramic figurines, polished iron ore mirrors, jade ornaments sourced from hundreds of miles distant. A population of several thousand inhabits the surrounding terrain, farming the rich alluvial lowlands, fishing the river channels, supplying the labor and food that the ceremonial center requires. The city does not exist in isolation. It commands a region, but it is the stone that carries the deepest authority. In the Tuxtla Mountains, approximately 60 miles to the northwest, basalt outcrops of volcanic origin provide the raw material for something unprecedented. Boulders weighing between 6 and 40 tons are identified, quarried, and moved across rivers, through marshland, over jungle terrain, using log rollers, rope, and the coordinated effort of hundreds of workers. Chemical analysis of the basalt in later centuries will confirm the Tuxtla source precisely, tracing each monument back to its origin in the volcanic highlands. 8 colossal heads have been recovered at San Lorenzo. Each stands between 1.5 and 1.8 meters tall. Each wears a distinctive helmet, some bearing straps, some bearing carved insignia, unique to that figure alone. The faces are individualized, broad, composed, deeply carved, with features that carry a specific human presence rather than a generic ideal. These are not gods rendered in stone. They are almost certainly rulers, specific individuals whose authority was so absolute that their likenesses were carved into boulders and placed across the ceremonial landscape for all who entered to witness. Colossal Head 1 at San Lorenzo gazes outward with an expression that is neither threatening nor welcoming. It is simply present, permanent, beyond argument. The surface of the basalt retains the marks of stone tools worked in careful, controlled strokes. The helmet curves over the crown with precision. The lips are slightly parted. Whatever name this ruler carried, whatever deeds define the reign, the stone has preserved the face across 3,000 years with a fidelity that no written record has matched. The act of carving these heads was itself an assertion of power. Not only the power to command the labor of transport and carving, but the power to define what permanence meant. In a world built largely of perishable materials, where houses of wood and thatch returned to the earth within generations, these stone faces declared something different. They declared that certain presences would not dissolve, that certain authority would outlast the bodies that held it. San Lorenzo, between 1200 and 900 BCE, is a city organized around the demonstration of that authority, in stone, in space, in the careful arrangement of monuments across a landscape that has been physically remade to serve a vision. The river below continues its slow movement through the lowlands. The forest presses close on every side, and above it all, the plateau holds its position, deliberate and unmistakable, the first true center of a civilization that is only beginning to understand what it can build. Beneath the plateau, something runs that most visitors never see. Cut into the volcanic tuff and lined with carefully fitted basalt blocks, a network of stone-covered channels extends beneath San Lorenzo's surface, draining water, directing flow, managing the hydraulic life of a city built on elevated ground above a flood-prone landscape. These channels, some running for dozens of meters, represent an engineering intelligence that operated not only above the earth, but within it. They are among the earliest known examples of planned hydraulic infrastructure in the Americas, and they suggest that the authority governing San Lorenzo extended downward into the ground itself, shaping the invisible architecture of the city as deliberately as its visible monuments. Authority in the Olmec world was never merely administrative, it was cosmological. The ruler did not simply command, the ruler occupied a position at the intersection of human and supernatural realms, a threshold figure whose power derived from proximity to forces that ordinary life could not access. This ideology found its most concentrated expression not in the colossal heads, which proclaimed identity and presence, but in the carved stone thrones, massive basalt monuments, once misidentified as altars, that stage the ruler's relationship to the cosmos in permanent, immovable form. The thrones are large, roughly cubic blocks of stone, their surfaces carved with scenes of extraordinary symbolic density. A central figure emerges from a niche cut into the monument's face, a cave opening, an earth mouth, the threshold between the underworld and the living world above. The figure sits within this opening, one hand extended, holding a rope or cord that runs along the throne's sides to bind figures carved in relief, captives, subordinates, or perhaps ancestral presences connected to the ruler's lineage. The message is architectural in its clarity. The ruler emerges from the earth's interior, from the realm of supernatural authority, and holds the human world in deliberate connection to that deeper order. Altar 4 at La Venta, though it belongs to the city that will rise after San Lorenzo's dominance, represents the fullest surviving expression of this tradition, a tradition whose conceptual roots lie firmly in the San Lorenzo period. The throne's central figure wears a headdress of layered symbolic elements. The niche behind him is framed by earth monster imagery. The bound figures on the sides wear their subordination as a cosmological fact, not merely a political one. To sit upon such a throne was to occupy the center of a universe that the stone itself described. Jade arrived at San Lorenzo from sources hundreds of miles distant. Isotopic analysis has traced Olmec jade to deposits along the Motagua River Valley in present-day Guatemala, confirming long-distance procurement networks operating centuries before La Venta's rise. The material's color, its translucency, its cool weight in the hand. These qualities made jade the physical embodiment of water, maize, breath, and life itself. Rulers and their immediate circle wore jade as ornament and carried it as ritual instrument. Magnetite and ilmenite mirrors, polished to tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter, reflected light with an almost unsettling precision. Objects of elite identity, possibly used in divination or fire-starting ceremonies whose exact nature the archaeological record preserves only in outline. The spatial organization of San Lorenzo reinforces every material distinction. Elite residential and ceremonial areas occupy the plateau's higher, more central zones. Evidence of craft production, food processing, and denser ordinary habitation clusters toward the plateau's edges and the lower ground surrounding it. Burial evidence amplifies the picture. Elite interments contain jade, mirrors, and fine ceramics. Commoner burials are simpler, more numerous, less marked. The city's physical geography is a diagram of its social order, and that order is not incidental. It has been planned, maintained, and expressed in stone with the same deliberateness that shaped the drainage channels beneath the ground and the thrones above it. San Lorenzo, in these centuries, is a city that has learned to make power visible at every scale, from the subterranean channels no one sees to the stone faces that no one can ignore. Around 900 BCE, something changes at San Lorenzo. The change is not gradual, it arrives with intention. The colossal heads, those immovable stone faces that have commanded the plateau for 3 centuries, are dragged from their positions, mutilated along specific features, and buried in organized rows. The thrones are similarly defaced, their carved surfaces deliberately damaged before being interred in the earth. This is not the work of invaders acting in chaos. The deposits are too orderly, the damage too selective. Whatever force reshapes San Lorenzo in these years, it operates with ceremony. The destruction itself is a ritual act, a formal ending, conducted with the same deliberateness that once raised these monuments. Whether this represents a political revolution, a dynastic replacement, or a ritual termination of a completed cosmic cycle remains one of Mesoamerican archaeology's most debated questions. What is clear is the consequence. Power moves north. La Venta occupies a low island in the marshlands of the Tonalá River, in what is now the state of Tabasco. It is not an obvious place to build a capital. The site is surrounded by swamp and river, accessible primarily by water, its ground soft and seasonally flooded, and yet these constraints may have been precisely the point. An island commands its approaches, water defines its boundaries, the difficulty of access concentrates authority. By 900 BCE, construction at La Venta is already underway on a scale that announces ambition. The centerpiece is an earthen pyramid, fluted along its sides in a form that some researchers have compared to a volcano, though the precise symbolic intention remains uncertain. It rises 34 meters above the surrounding landscape, making it the tallest structure in Mesoamerica at the time of its construction. It is built entirely from earth and clay, compacted and shaped by human labor across generations, its mass representing an extraordinary investment of collective effort. The pyramid anchors a ceremonial complex organized along a precise north-south axis, offset approximately 8 degrees west of true north, an alignment that appears intentional, possibly tracking specific astronomical phenomena. Long plazas extend southward from the pyramid's base, flanked by low earthen platforms. The entire complex reads as a cosmological diagram made physical, a map of the Olmec universe pressed into the landscape of a river island. Beneath the plazas, the builders bury their most extraordinary statements. The serpentine mosaic pavements, Massive deposits of carefully shaped green stone blocks arranged into abstract jaguar mask patterns are laid with precision, then immediately covered with clay and earth, never intended to be seen again. These are offerings to the earth itself, gifts buried at the threshold between the human world and what lies beneath it. Each pavement required the transport of hundreds of tons of serpentine from sources in Guerrero, hundreds of miles distant. The buried offering caches deepen the picture. Offering 4, one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries at the site, contains 16 figurines, 15 carved from jade and serpentine, 1 fashioned from granite, arranged in an apparent ritual scene. They stand in a loose grouping before a row of jade celts positioned upright like standing stones. The figurines face a single individual who stands apart, possibly a ruler, a priest, or a supernatural figure. The scene was buried complete, sealed beneath the plaza surface, preserved for 3,000 years until excavation revealed it in the 20th century. La Venta, across its 5 centuries of occupation, accumulates offerings of extraordinary density. Jade masks, jade celts, iron ore mirrors, ceramic vessels, and carved figures descend into the earth in layer after layer, each deposit a transaction between the living and the forces that sustain them. The city does not merely display power. It continuously invests it downward, into the ground, into the dark. The pyramid stands above all of this, above the buried pavements, above the sealed caches, above the axial plazas, as a visible anchor for a world whose most important transactions are invisible. The stone does not give easily. It never has. Jade resists every tool brought against it. Iron would have helped, but iron is centuries away. What the Olmec craftsperson possesses instead is time, patience, and an intimate understanding of how hard stone yields to harder stone, to wet sand, to the slow rotation of a reed drill loaded with abrasive. A single jade celt, smooth and tapered, its surface carrying the faint green translucence of deep water, may represent weeks of sustained labor. The object in the finished hand weighs almost nothing. The effort embedded within it is immeasurable. Jade arrives at the Gulf Coast workshops from a distance that makes its presence remarkable. Isotopic analysis of Olmec jade artifacts has confirmed the Motagua River Valley in present-day Guatemala as the primary source, a geological deposit some 500 miles from the Olmec heartland. The raw material moves northward and westward through exchange networks whose precise mechanisms remain only partially understood. It passes through intermediate communities, changes hands across mountain and lowland, arrives finally at workshops where specialists have spent lifetimes learning the material's behavior under pressure, its response to abrasion, the angles at which it fractures, and the angles at which it does not. The finished forms are specific and intentional. Celts, elongated, polished, often incised with were-jaguar imagery, appear in burial caches and offering deposits across the Olmec world and far beyond it. Jade masks capture faces with an economy of line that achieves something close to portraiture. Figurines render the human body in postures of ritual significance. Their surfaces work to a smoothness that catches light like still water. Each object is a compressed statement about the relationship between the living, the dead, and the forces that govern both. The Las Limas figure, discovered in 1965 near the town of Las Limas in Veracruz, represents the tradition at its most complex. A seated male figure holds across his lap the limp body of a were-jaguar infant. the supernatural child deity whose imagery runs through Olmec art across centuries. The infant's face carries the characteristic features: downturned mouth, cleft head, the ambiguous boundary between human and jaguar. On the shoulders and knees of the seated figure, incised with extraordinary precision, appear 4 additional supernatural faces, each distinct, each belonging to a specific being within the Olmec cosmological system. The object is not merely beautiful, it is a theological document rendered in stone. Alongside jade, the Olmec elite commanded another class of remarkable material: magnetite and ilmenite mirrors, flat, circular, polished to tolerances measured in microns, appear in elite burials and offering caches at La Venta and San Lorenzo. Their reflective surfaces achieve a quality that approaches modern optical standards, accomplished entirely through manual abrasion. Whether these mirrors served in fire-starting ceremonies, divination practices, or as markers of elite identity, they represent a mastery of material transformation that parallels the jade workshops in its demands. The trade networks sustaining this material world extend in every direction. Obsidian from the central Mexican highlands reaches Gulf Coast sites in finished and unfinished forms. Iron ore, hematite, and magnetite moves from deposits in Oaxaca. Serpentine arrives from Guerrero. The Gulf Coast sends outward in return rubber, cacao, and the prestige of Olmec symbolic forms that communities across Mesoamerica appear to have actively sought. The exchange is not merely economic, it is the circulation of a worldview carried in portable objects, spreading the visual language of Olmec cosmology across a vast and varied landscape. The jade resting in a highland burial chamber carries the Gulf Coast with it, its workshops, its specialists, its understanding of what sacred material means and what it costs to make. The figure is neither one thing nor the other. That is precisely the point. It sits at the threshold between the human world and something older, something that does not have a name in any language that has survived. The were-jaguar, part infant, part great cat, entirely supernatural, appears across Olmec art with a consistency that speaks not of decoration, but of doctrine. The downturned mouth, the cleft head, the smooth skin that carries feline markings rendered in stone and jade and ceramic. These are not variations on a theme. They are repetitions of a truth the Olmec returned to across 8 centuries of artistic production. The cosmological system this figure anchors is layered and precise. The Olmec world is not flat. It moves vertically through registers: sky above, earth in the middle, underworld below. Each zone inhabited by forces that must be acknowledged, negotiated, and ritually sustained. The sacred cave is the threshold between earth and underworld, a mouth in the landscape through which supernatural energy flows in both directions. Olmec thrones depict rulers emerging from exactly such niches, not metaphorically, but cosmologically. The ruler is the hinge. The ruler holds the layers in relation to one another. 4 directional world trees anchor the horizontal plane, orienting the cosmos and the ceremonial center alike. La Venta's north-south axis is not administrative convenience. It is cosmological alignment made permanent in earth and stone. The pyramid itself may represent the sacred mountain, the axis connecting underworld to sky, the place where rain descends and maize rises, where the were-jaguar's domain of fertility and earth power concentrates into a single vertical form. Rain matters above everything else in the Gulf Coast lowlands. The agricultural cycle depends on it absolutely. The were-jaguar's association with rain, with the Earth's generative capacity, with the forces that determine whether the maize grows or fails, gives the figure its authority. This is not abstract theology. It is survival rendered sacred. The ball game enters this cosmological world with full ceremonial weight. Rubber trees grow abundantly across the Gulf Coast lowlands. The Aztec name for the Olmec, Olmecatl in Nahuatl, means approximately rubber people, a name that carries the memory of what this landscape produced and what these people made from it. The solid rubber ball used in the game is heavy, dense, and capable of serious injury. The earliest clear ball court evidence in Mesoamerica comes from San Lorenzo. The game played there is not sport in any modern sense. It enacts something: cosmic struggle, seasonal renewal, the movement of celestial bodies across the sky, the boundary between life and what lies beyond it. Ritual deposits throughout Olmec sites reflect this coherent religious architecture. Incense burner fragments appear in ceremonial contexts, their smoke carrying offerings upward through the layered cosmos. Burial practices show differential treatment aligned with social and spiritual status. The spatial organization of every major Olmec center, the careful placement of mounds, courts, and offering caches, is a map of the invisible world made visible in earth and stone. The were-jaguar motif does not stay on the Gulf Coast. It moves outward through the same trade networks that carry jade and obsidian, appearing at sites across Oaxaca, Guerrero, and the Valley of Mexico. Communities far from the Olmec heartland adopt the imagery, adapt it, embed it in their own emerging ritual systems. The visual language of Olmec cosmology spreads not through conquest, but through the deep persuasiveness of a worldview that answers fundamental questions about rain, fertility, death, and renewal. What the jade carries in its material weight, the were-jaguar carries in its symbolic force, a grammar of the sacred that the entire Mesoamerican world will spend the next 2,000 years elaborating. The serpentine tablet sits in the earth for nearly 3,000 years before anyone trained to read it holds it in their hands. When it finally surfaces near the town of Cascajal in Veracruz, its significance is not immediately apparent. It is a flat, worn piece of stone, roughly the size of a large book, its surface covered in carved signs that follow no obvious pattern a modern eye can immediately decode. Published in 2006 by a team of researchers including Richard Deal and Mary Pohl, the Cascajal block enters the scholarly record as something extraordinary. 62 distinct signs arranged in sequences, some repeating, some appearing only once, carved into serpentine with a precision that speaks of intentionality rather than decoration. The block dates to approximately 900 BCE. If the interpretation holds, it predates every other confirmed writing system in the Americas by centuries. The signs themselves resist easy translation. They are not pictographs in any simple sense, not direct images of objects standing in for words. Several resemble insects, plants, or abstract geometric forms. Others appear to be composite symbols combining multiple elements. What makes the Cascajal block compelling to researchers is the patterning. Signs appear in sequences that suggest syntax, that suggest a system where order carries meaning. Repetition clusters in ways consistent with known early scripts elsewhere in the world. The block may have been used and reused. Its surface shows signs of erasure and recarving, suggesting it functioned as a working document rather than a monument. Whether the Cascajal block represents true writing, a system capable of encoding specific spoken language, or a sophisticated proto-writing tradition remains actively debated. Some scholars argue the signs constitute a genuine script. Others maintain the evidence for phonetic encoding remains insufficient. What neither side disputes is that the Olmec possessed a rich iconographic program of extraordinary complexity, one in which symbols communicated political and religious authority with systematic precision across centuries and across hundreds of miles of Mesoamerican geography. The intellectual ambition visible in the Cascajal block extends into time itself. The long count calendar, the great Mesoamerican system for recording historical dates across vast spans of time, later perfected by the Maya, carries conceptual roots that many researchers trace to Olmec traditions. The system counts days from a fixed mythological starting point, accumulating into units of 20, then 400, then 8,000 days, capable of recording dates spanning millennia without ambiguity. Stela C at Tres Zapotes bears a long count inscription corresponding to 31 BCE, recorded as 7.1, 6.6, 0.1, 6.1, 8, one of the earliest confirmed calendar dates in the Americas, carved at a site that bridges the Olmec world and the cultures emerging from it. The stela itself is fragmentary. Its lower portion was recovered by Matthew Sterling in 1939. The upper section, bearing the were-jaguar mask that completes the monument, was found decades later. Together, the two pieces demonstrate the continuity of Olmec visual and intellectual traditions persisting into the final centuries BCE, long after La Venta's ceremonial center had fallen silent. What the Cascajal block and Stela C share is the suggestion of a civilization that understood recording, that grasped the power of fixing meaning in stone against the erosion of memory. The colossal heads record faces, the thrones record political cosmology, the jade offerings record devotion, and the signs carved into serpentine and basalt record something harder to name. The Olmec desire to make thought permanent, to press the invisible structures of time and authority into material that outlasts the hand that shaped it. The grammar of the sacred that moves outward through trade and imagery now reveals a deeper ambition, not merely to inhabit the world, but to describe it, to count it, to hold it still long enough to be read. Around 400 BCE, the silence comes not with catastrophe, but with intention. La Venta does not burn in a single night. It is closed. The colossal heads, those immovable stone presences that have anchored the ceremonial center for centuries, are moved from their original positions. Monuments are buried in organized deposits, their faces turned downward or covered with deliberate fill. The pattern mirrors what happened at San Lorenzo 5 centuries earlier. A ritual termination, a structured ending, as though the city itself must be formally concluded before it can be left behind. The reasons accumulate rather than arrive singularly. The Tonalá River, whose marshland island gave La Venta its geographic authority, appears to have shifted its course over the centuries, a common fate along the dynamic Gulf Coast lowlands, where rivers migrate across their floodplains with geological indifference to human settlement. When the waterways that sustained agriculture and enabled transport begin to change, the logistical foundation of a ceremonial capital weakens quietly before it collapses visibly. Environmental evidence from sediment cores in the region suggests prolonged periods of reduced rainfall during the late first millennium BCE, compounding pressures on agricultural systems already stressed by population and extraction. Political fragmentation likely accelerates what environmental pressure begins. The Olmec world was never a unified empire with a single administrative center commanding distant provinces. It was a network of influence, ceremonial authority radiating outward from dominant centers, sustained by the prestige of monuments, the control of sacred materials, and the ideological power of the were-jaguar tradition. When La Venta's ability to project that authority diminishes, the network does not simply transfer to a new capital, it disperses. Power moves to smaller regional centers scattered across the Gulf Coast and beyond. Among these, Tres Zapotes in western Veracruz endures longest, neither fully Olmec in the classic sense, nor yet the cultures that will inherit the landscape. Its occupation continues into approximately 150 CE, bridging centuries that see the rise of Monte Alban among the Zapotec, the early florescence of Maya ceremonial centers in the lowlands, and the spread of Izapan artistic traditions along the Pacific coast. Tres Zapotes is a threshold site, and its most significant artifact, Stela C, bearing one of the earliest confirmed long-count calendar dates, captures precisely that transitional character. Old intellectual traditions persisting into a new cultural world. What disperses from La Venta is not merely population, it is grammar, the axial orientation of ceremonial space, that deliberate north-south alignment first expressed at La Venta's pyramid complex, reappears in early Maya site planning. The were-jaguar imagery, transformed but recognizable, moves through Izapan art into the classic Maya supernatural vocabulary. The ball game, already ancient in Olmec practice, becomes the central ritual institution of every subsequent Mesoamerican civilization. Jade retains its supreme sacred status across cultures and centuries. The conceptual architecture of Olmec cosmology, the layered universe, the cave as underworld entrance, the ruler as axis between human and divine, becomes the shared inheritance of civilizations that will never name their source. At Monte Alban, founded around 500 BCE in the valley of Oaxaca, Phase 1 material culture shows unmistakable Olmec-derived iconographic elements in its early carved monuments. The Zapotec did not copy the Olmec. They absorbed, transformed, and built forward from a tradition already embedded in regional exchange networks. The same process unfolds among the early Maya, where Olmec-style jade celts and were-jaguar motifs appear in elite burial contexts, predating the classic period by centuries. The mother civilization does not die in 400 BCE. It completes a long dispersal that had been underway for generations. Its cultural DNA, already written into the foundations of every tradition that will define Mesoamerica for the next 2,000 years. La Venta's pyramid stands overgrown, its serpentine mosaics buried beneath accumulated soil, its plazas reclaimed by tropical vegetation. But the ideas that were shaped within that axial ceremonial landscape continue moving outward, carried in the hands of craftspeople, in the minds of priests, in the ritual memory of peoples who may not have known the name of the civilization that first gave those ideas their monumental form. In 1938, a Smithsonian archaeologist named Matthew Sterling travels to the Gulf Coast lowlands of Veracruz with a small expedition team and a set of coordinates pointing toward a mound field at Tres Zapotes. What he uncovers there, and at La Venta 2 years later, begins one of the most consequential revisions in the history of American archaeology. The colossal heads emerge from the earth slowly, their basalt surfaces root-scarred and soil-darkened, their features intact after more than 2,000 years of burial, Sterling photographs them, measures them, and publishes findings that the scholarly world initially resists with considerable force. The resistance is revealing. Established Mesoamerican archaeology in the mid-20th century had organized itself around the Maya as the foundational high culture of the region. The idea that an earlier, distinct civilization had preceded and possibly seeded Maya. Complexity was unwelcome. Critics questioned Sterling's dating. They suggested the colossal heads were late, derivative, perhaps even Mayan in origin. The debate persists through the 1950s and into the 1960s, when radiocarbon dating technology begins producing results that cannot be argued away. San Lorenzo's occupation layers date to 1200 BCE and earlier. La Venta's pyramid predates classic Maya construction by centuries. The chronology holds. By the 1970s, systematic excavations at San Lorenzo under archaeologist Michael Coe and later Richard Deal produced stratigraphic evidence confirming Olmec priority. The site yields not only monumental sculpture, but ceramic sequences, faunal remains, and spatial data that reconstruct a functioning urban center of several thousand inhabitants operating at a level of organizational complexity previously unattributed to this period in Mesoamerica. The colossal heads are chemically sourced to specific basalt flows in the Tuxtla Mountains through neutron activation analysis, confirming transport logistics that still astonish researchers today. The mother culture debate evolves rather than resolves. Scholars including Miguel Covarrubias argued for direct Olmec parentage of all subsequent Mesoamerican traditions. Others, examining the archaeological record at Monte Alban and early Maya sites, proposed parallel development. Regional cultures, absorbing shared ideas without a single origin point. The current scholarly consensus occupies a careful middle ground. The Olmec were not the sole origin of Mesoamerican civilization, but their cultural innovations, the ball game, jade symbolism, were jaguar iconography, axial ceremonial planning, and early calendrical concepts, spread with sufficient consistency and priority to justify their foundational status. Today, 17 colossal heads are confirmed across 4 sites. 9 stand at the Museo de Antropología de Tzalapa in Veracruz, the finest collection of Olmec monumental sculpture in the world. Under controlled museum lighting, the scale of these objects reasserts itself completely. The largest weighs approximately 40 tons. Each face is individual. Each helmet is distinct. They represent specific human beings whose names are lost, whose dynasties left no written record that has survived, whose civilization was unknown to modern scholarship until less than a century ago. The Gulf Coast river landscape at golden hour looks, in certain lights, much as it must have looked 3,000 years ago. The Coatzacoalcos moves through its floodplain. The tropical forest presses close. Somewhere beneath the soil, objects not yet excavated wait in the darkness. Jade celts, ceramic figurines, buried mosaic pavements. Perhaps inscribed stones bearing signs no living person has yet learned to read. The Olmec built no named empire. They left no dynastic king lists. What they left was more enduring, the deep structural grammar of a civilization written into the foundations of every culture that followed them across 2,000 years of Mesoamerican history. Thank you for traveling through this story, from the first river settlements to the last buried monuments. If this series has brought the Olmec world to life for you, subscribing to the channel ensures you won't miss the next civilization waiting to be uncovered.